Now, recently I've been watching a lot of my old amateur fights. I've been putting them on Instagram, posting them and just telling the story of, the fights and what happened. And one thing I noticed is how aggressive I used to fight and how many shots I used to take. Now, it's one of the things that doesn't often get talked about in boxing as much as other stuff, is actually taking punches. It is 50% of the game, taking punches, and the ability to learn how to not take punches. It's one of the biggest obstacles you're going to have to learn as a boxer to overcome, the ability to take a shot. And it's one of the scariest things in which you're going to have to find out, can I take that punch? It leaves you ultimately very vulnerable if you can't take a punch. And, to put yourself in that position is quite scary. Now, it's quite bizarre. My relationship with taking punches has changed over the years. I've been boxing for 14 years. And when I started at 14, once I learned that I could take a shot, it was very much a strange relationship where I didn't mind taking punishment. I think lots of boxers will understand this, but I would sometimes willingly take shots. As surreal as that sounds, or as absurd as that sounds, sometimes I would, or I wouldn't mind getting in to fight. It was just the ultimate buzz. Now, I've been professional for 7 years and I completely hate taking punches now. I look back and I wince when I see old fights, and I try everything in my power to not take punches. Every punch you take to the head is damaging, and any amateurs that I see that shared the way I felt when I was young, I talk out of taking punches willingly. It is just irreversible damage. However, whilst taking punches isn't something that you want to willingly do, it's something you're going to have to do, and it's something that you're going to have to draw that fine line between not willingly taking punches but being willing to take the punches when they come. So in this video, and I got this idea from a follower actually, I'm just going to go through the times in which I got chin checked through my career and tell the story, how I developed my confidence in taking punches, how I got through moments of crisis, how I felt when taking punches, ultimately how I was able to put on a poker face in some instances, and in other instances my body just went out of control. I was very lucky in the regards that I never got dropped in boxing. I boxed for 14 years, I just was able to take a good shot. There was one instance when I first started, I went in against a middleweight called Tom Simmons. And he had been boxing as an amateur a lot longer than me. He's a heavyweight professional now, and he hit me with a solar plexus shot that just completely took the wind out of me, and that just stopped me in my tracks. But I was lucky that I never actually went down or took a standing 8 count from a shot. But ultimately, learning how to take punches and learning that you can take punches gives you so much more confidence in yourself. So here are the times in which I got chin checked, and I'll go just through some of the hardest punches I've faced in boxing. It's always a fascinating subject, and I'll save it to the end of the video, but there's one guy that always stands out to me when it comes to punching power. Now, I'm actually going to start off with my first ever fight. This is against Patrick Murphy. It was 14 years of age, and I was 58 kilograms. Now, I didn't take anything really significantly damaging here, but this was the first time in a fight environment where I learned I could take shots and fire back, and I was more exhausted than anything. It was more survival instinct, fight or flight, and the fight mechanism kicked in. But I did take some clean punches in this one. I'd never taken them before, and I learned that my instinctive reaction is to throw back, almost over the top. However, this was a huge part of my development, because although I didn't take anything that really hurt me, I learned that I can take a punch and I can survive, under fire, and actually thrive and throw back. So this was a big part of my development. Now we're going to get into the times in which I really started feeling shots and how I learned and developed and survived through these instances. Now the first one, there's no particular instance in which I really felt the shots, but it's against William Weather. Now he's an undefeated professional now in the super middleweight division, and he's a good fighter. He was southpaw and he threw lots of punches in bunches. Now I took the fight to Weber and he would just catch me coming in. He actually beat me on points. But I remember taking quite a few clean shots by this point, and I think I was about 20 fights into my amateur career, and I was fully confident in my chin, and I just tried to fight like Golovkin. And ultimately what I learned from this is you don't necessarily need to rely on your toughness, because it would lose me fights, my willingness to take shots. And I ultimately, when I watch these back, wish that I'd boxed on the back foot a little bit more, because it would have won me more fights and more titles as an amateur. Now, this is another amateur fight. This is against another future pro in Billy Underwood. He, I believe, again, is a super middleweight too, as a professional. But he caught me very clean. This was actually a bit of a tear-up, this one. None of the shots actually hurt me. One thing I learned from this one, and again, I watched these back and I wince. I'm like, oh, because this is my brain that's getting rocked here. But I learned the art of psychological warfare with this one. Because usually you keep a straight face. You don't let anyone know that you've been hurt. But with this, I kept smiling at him every time he hit me. I think I just watched a Brandon Rios fight. And I don't know why I was doing it, but I just kept smiling and kept walking forward. And it was a little bit of that Steve Collins, Chris Eubank treatment, where you just convince your opponent that, you know, you can hit me with whatever you want. I'm going to keep coming forward. And I was actually able to win this fight. And there was a little bit of underrated defence in there too. And number 5 is when I boxed Lewis Richardson. Lewis Richardson has gone on to be a middleweight Olympic bronze medalist, as far as I'm aware. He's a phenomenal fighter, the best I boxed as an amateur. And he was a lot bigger than me too in this fight. He was a southpaw and he basically beat the brakes off me, to be honest with you. And I didn't actually get the fight tape because I was so annoyed. So this is the only clip I have of that fight. But in this one, I learned that I can rely on my own toughness to get through fights, because I was just taking an absolute pasting in this one. And this was around the time Teddy Atlas gave that, you know, that epic fireman speech. And kind of tongue-in-cheek, when I went into the corner, my coach said, look, you know, do you want me to stop it? And as a joke, I went, we are firemen. And I just learned that, you know, although I lost pretty much every minute of this fight, I didn't get counted and I didn't get stopped, and I could get through those tough fights. And now we're going into the top 4. Now, these are really the only 4 instances in which I can kind of remember that I got rocked in my boxing career. And number 4 is against Danny Barrett. Now, the story of this fight is pretty nuts, really, because my coach, Keith Hawkins at the time, said, do you like fighting southpaws, in the prep to this one? And I didn't really care, to be honest with you. But he found probably the hardest southpaw that he could find at the time. I think I was 17 here, and Danny Barrett had about 2 to 3 times the amount of experience as me. And he was covered in tattoos, which for a 17-year-old, I was like, oh, here we go. But he had been in and out. I believe he had dropped Lewis Isaacs, who I actually went on to fight, who's one of the most durable people I've ever met in boxing. And yeah, we went out, and then he came out in orthodox, which completely threw me as well, because I thought I was fighting a southpaw. But yeah, going into this fight, I had to get a train and 2 buses, and I went in with a cold as well. It was one of those ones I really didn't want to do, but I thought, oh, Harry Greb would do it, so I got in and fought this guy, and I actually gave a good account of myself, to be honest, but I did lose this one. But he hit me with this right hand as my whole body weight went flying through. And this is the first time, maybe the second time, that I actually felt like I lost control temporarily. When I watch the clip back, it's not that obvious. But oh man, this guy hit really hard, and this shot, I felt this shot a lot. But again, another instance in which my confidence grew in my ability to get through punishment. And although I lost this one, again, it just gave me that confidence for later fights that when it got tough, I knew I could get through it. And number 3, and the lesson I learned with this one, is to never switch off. It only takes 1 punch. And this was against a guy called Kristaps Zorgis. Now, he was strong, really strong. I was only about 22 when I boxed him, and he was, you know, a fully grown man. Which it makes a difference. And he was a journeyman, but his record was 3 wins to 6 losses and 3 draws, I think, which is pretty much 6 and 6. He probably deserved a few of the losses. These journeymen don't get results, you know, that they deserve. And he was coming off of a knockout win over a prospect. And I actually found a lot of his tapes from unlicensed and white collar bouts where he was just absolutely sparking people. So this geezer could really punch. Now, this was 4 rounds as a professional, and I basically won every minute of the fight in the first 3 rounds, and I was into the 4th, and I was winning that too. And all of a sudden, he sort of threw this jab, and I sort of just bit, and he curled this right hook round, which just caught me completely flush on the chin. And I could take that because I knew that was coming. But he followed up with this left uppercut that I just did not see, and it caught me completely clean. I just temporarily rocked me. And the first thing I learned about this is, wow, when you get hit with those 10 or 8 ounce pro gloves, it is no joke. You really feel those punches. But also just to never ever switch off. Any guy can catch you. And this guy's record was deceiving because he was strong and this shot hurt me. Luckily I was able to take it and throw back, but I never switched off again in a professional fight after taking this shot. Now the second hardest punch that I ever took from memory was against a guy called Mboyo Maluti. Now me and Mboyo actually became friends and stablemates and sparring partners later. And there's a little story that in sparring he hit me with this shot. And ever since, I've just had this little black dot in my eye from that shot. So Mboyo could punch. And these are the things that you get fighting. I'm not, praising this or, glamorizing it. I'm just telling the story. But, fighting is a damaged sport. That's why I'm not boxing anymore. I ultimately become sick of it. But in our fight, I was giving away a little bit of weight too with this one. And this was actually the second time I boxed in one day. I'd won the fight that morning, and then I boxed Mboyo later on in the afternoon. And going into the third and final round, it was a really close one, and I needed to win the round. I came out with urgency because I needed to win it. And I remember my coach at the time, Rob Parker, actually gave me a slap round the cheeks, which I'd always seen on films, but I'd never had done to me. And I tell you what, it does wake you up. And I went out and I threw this left hook, which had just a bit too much fat on the shot. And I did absolutely nothing wrong. My right hand was up where it needed to be, but Mboyo threw a nicely timed, shorter left hook that just found a tiny bit of chin that I was leaving out available. And my entire body weight went through this punch. And this is the first time I got knocked off balance. But I was able to get my foot in the right position and instantly recover. But this is such a big turning point for me because this is the first time I actually ever got caught with a real clean punch that hurt me. And within a couple of minutes I was fine and reacting fine. And I ultimately learned here that I could take a shot. Now the hardest punch I recall taking from a fight that rocked me was against Lewis Isaacs in the pros. Lewis Isaacs was a really tough amateur. I think he'd had about 70 fights. And although he didn't score the knockouts in the pros when we boxed, he was facing tough journeymen that you just don't stop. But he had been blasting people away as an amateur, good fights too. And the idea of this one, because it was a longer fight that I was used to, it was a title eliminator. The idea was to go out in round one and just not get caught by Isaacs early. Don't give him that early shot. So that was the only game plan I had on my mind in this fight. And I went out, I boxed, and he sort of threw this jab and I bit to throw like a left hook. And he just threw his entire body weight through this left hook, and it just absolutely caught me clean about 10 seconds into the first round. Now this one actually had me hurt. I was seeing stars after this. You have the stars in your eyes, and yeah, I instantly knew, wow, this is going to be a fight. I knew that before anyway, but it was probably the best thing that could have happened to me because I woke up and my initial response was to just, right, survive. Don't show him you're hurt and box. And when I started hitting him back, I was landing very clean shots, but I was tense. And I ultimately learnt from this one that just relax, see the shots coming and don't be tense. That's why you see a lot of first round knockouts, because people are tense. Luckily I took this one and it didn't, iron me out, but it very easily could have. And he punched me with so many other shots in this fight. But because I had taken this one and accepted that this is how hard it's going to be, none of those shots actually hurt. I felt them, but none of them had that same reaction as this first shot. But these were 8 ounce gloves as well. Oh man, I actually broke my own hand in this fight too. These gloves are so small. And those from memory are the shots that hurt me the most. Now, I have had a living of getting punched in the head, so it wouldn't surprise me if my memory is a little hazy. But in all seriousness, I would never condone trying to take punches to the head or willingly taking punches to the head. As a professional, it became my absolute goal to not take shots as often as I could. But if you're going to be a boxer, this is something you're going to have to learn, and you're going to have to go through experiences, and you're going to have a certain level of willingness to take the shots in order to succeed. It's that risk and reward factor. You know, the whole idea of slipping a punch is to attack where the shot is coming. If you shy away, it will land. So it's something you definitely need to learn, and it's an interesting subject. And ultimately, how do you cope when you take those shots? Can you survive? Do you fold? Or do you just not see the shot coming? And then that takes me on to the guys that actually had the most power. That I boxed in sparring or I boxed in fights. Now the standouts would be Danny Barrett, because he punched very hard. Lewis Richardson, he hurt me quite a few times. And Lewis Isaacs. Lewis Isaacs was as strong as a bull. I remember those guys just being strong punchers. And Boyo Maluti was a strong puncher too. But in regards to the actual hardest punches I've ever been hit by, I remember Josh Kelly being a lot stronger than I thought he would be. His strength was very underrated. He was so difficult to hit in sparring, but he was strong too. Harlem Eubank had an explosive kind of strength. Not necessarily the hardest puncher that I've ever been hit by, but he would just sort of boom and catch you when you didn't see it. And he actually broke my nose doing that. I sparred Harlem quite a lot. So he was definitely a good puncher. Probably one of the last top professionals I ever sparred was Lewis Crocker, and he hit very, very hard. He's a real strong puncher, and he loads up, but he sort of catches you with shots you don't see. He caught me with this shot in my liver that I remember really sort of, but overhand rights to their club. Jermaine Brown was a hard puncher, super middleweight English champion. When he caught you, you know, he definitely had pop. And Abbas Barao, European champion, junior middleweight, he was a good puncher too, strong. Abbas was a weird one. You didn't really see how good he was until sort of around 7, 8, 9, 10 when he just picked it up. But the hardest puncher I've ever been hit by is a guy called Simeon Preedy. Oh man, this by far too. This guy, every time he hit me in sparring, had me seeing stars. Simeon was, oh man, it was like getting hit with a sledgehammer. You know, this is probably where I started shifting. Maybe it's a good idea to learn my defense a bit more. Now, nowadays, I pride myself on my defensive work, you know, making shots miss. But if you've ever boxed, you'll realise how difficult it is to make shots miss consistently. So it's something you need to work on. But yeah, Simeon, he would load up and hit you with everything. I believe as a professional, he's 10-0 with 7 knockouts now. But yeah, without a doubt, the hardest puncher I have ever faced is Simeon Preedy. Yeah, just an absolute beast of a guy. But yeah, ultimately, you know, those are my experiences with taking shots. I'm not a fan of taking shots. You know, ultimately, I've become sick of taking shots. But it is part of boxing, and it is something you're going to have to learn to accept. Although you want to minimise it as much as you can.